The long-awaited Squad Busters tier list is here. In this video, we're going to be ranking the best and the worst squad characters inside of the game. Starting it off in the not enough time playing tier is going to be Penny, Tank, and Heavy. I just have not played these characters enough to accurately put them on the tier list. Coming in at the E tier, one of the worst characters inside of Squad Busters is going to be Mavis. The reason being is because when she goes to a carrot patch, she's vulnerable. It kind of just leaves your team out to dry, kind of like Greg. At least Greg could do extra damage to trees and give you some extra power in some game modes. Mavis only doing 125 damage and having 1300 HP is just not going to be enough to be good inside of Squad Busters. Next up, we're going to have the Trader. Unfortunately, yes, you're going to get gems for gold, but you just don't get enough gold inside of Squad Busters to really make the Trader worth it. Even at the Super for the Trader, he's just not good enough. I just recommend you do not play the Trader inside of Squad Busters. Coming in at the third worst character inside of Squad Busters is Greg. He's going to do 100 damage, have 1300 HP, and unfortunately for Greg, taking down trees is not really going to help you out in the late game, and if you do evolve him and fuse him up, he still is not strong. Any other character will give you more pressure, more damage in the late game, and that's kind of the series with these three worst characters inside of Squad Busters is yes, they do a little bit as far as supplying is concerned, but they just don't pack the punch towards the mid to late game when you're fighting in these fights towards the end and winning or losing these battles. Next up, we have the D tier. Coming in at the fourth worst character inside of Squad Busters is going to be the Goblin. 170 damage, 1200 HP, and once again is going to be a supplier. Yes, the gold is good. The game modes for the Goblin is kind of okay in doppelgangers, but the problem with the Goblin is it just has such a weak amount of health. It just doesn't do much in the late game where it can get sniped down super fast, and that's just something that you don't want to happen. It's always in the front line. It's a super fast unit that is going to get in there quick, and he's just going to get taken out. And if you evolve it, it really isn't a great fusion as well. So you're kind of stuck into one of those things where, what do? Do you just stay at one Goblin, you leave it, it'll just get eliminated instantly in a late game round, in a battle? It's just not a very good champion. Next up, we have the Royal King. Unfortunately for the Royal King, the Royal Recruits are okay, but he just is a epic character, which means it's harder to fuse, which means in order to get the Royal King, you're probably going to have to sacrifice a lot of other characters to either A, fuse up, or B, play. And right now, the Royal King just isn't that great. 115 damage, 2200 HP, just doesn't pack enough punch to be successful. Next up is Dynamite. Being an attacker, having 60 damage, 800 HP, it just is not good at all until you fuse it, and then it starts doing a lot of damage. Unfortunately, Dynamite is a rare. It's a little bit harder to pull in these boxes, and it just is not going to pick you up enough value in the early to mid game, and even in the late game where you can get other champions that are going to do more damage. Next up, we have the C tier. Coming in here as El Primo is the first character here in the C tier. Going to be a defender, going to do 100 damage, 2800 HP. El Primo is very, very tanky. He's pretty good at stunning your opponent's army, which is why he's in the C tier. Unfortunately, it kind of is a 50-50 character right now. It's like it's a good tank. There aren't that many great tanks in the game. Barbarian King is probably the best. El Primo is very, very good. It does have a mega form, which is El Tigre. That's not really part of the El Primo, so I'm not going to classify that here. Unfortunately, El Primo just doesn't do enough damage for me to put him a little bit higher, and right now I think the name of the game is speed and damage inside of Squad Busters. Next up, we have Nita. Being a defender doing 85 damage and 1200 HP, the bear that she summons is huge and it will win you some matches. Unfortunately though, for Nita, you do have to get pretty much the fusion bear and you have to upgrade her to her super form for her to start really ramping up and doing a lot of damage in the match. But once you do get that, Nita could be a powerhouse, especially for the fact that she's almost 2 characters in one, which is very valuable, especially when you need just bodies to soak damage in the late game. Next up, we have the B tier. The Barbarian is going to be our first character here in the B tier, doing 140 damage, having 1400 HP. He's an all-around kind of good character. He does a lot of damage, he's tanky, he's pretty much everything that you want, but he's not overpowered, he's not weak, he's kind of exactly in the middle where you would expect a Barbarian to be. Next up, we have the Wizard. This might be a controversial one for a lot of people, but coming in at 120 damage and 850 HP, the splash damage is beautiful, as well as having an extra spell slot. Late game cannon plus a bomb, or a cannon plus a healing, or having Pam's heal as well. There's a lot of reasons why the Wizard could really bolster your army. It definitely is one of those characters that can carry you in the late game. Yes, it's not a good character in the early game, but if you can get it fused late, you will be able to dominate when all of the characters are all clumped together in the end game. Next up in the B tier, we have Pam. 170 damage, 1200 HP. She is a healer. Very, very good, but you kind of need the super form so that you can get the heal station spell, which is really, really, really good for Pam, especially coupled with the Wizard. Pam does a little bit of damage. She also can heal up your entire troops. That's why she's going to be in the B tier. Healing is very important inside of squad busters, because most of the time, especially towards the late game, your squad is not going to be at full life, and if it is, you take a bad trade, you're going to need to heal that HP up, and Pam is here for you. Next up, we have Shelly. 150 damage, 1300 HP. She pretty much is an all-around good character inside of squad busters. Really does everything that a Barbarian does, but a little bit better with the knockback, with the spell as well. So that is why Shelly is here in the B tier all the way up. It's a very good character, especially to use inside of squad busters. Next up, we have the Battle Healer. The reason why the Battle Healer is so high is because in the late game, having 120 damage and 1800 HP is not the reason why she is good. The reason why she is good is because she boosts the health of your squad by either 400 or 600, depending on how far you have her evolved. This is absolutely huge, especially in the late game when you can get her as one of your last units, bolster all of the squad HP up, and that's going to give you a massive advantage, especially when you have like 7 characters. Times that by 600. Who can do math? That's a lot. Next up, we have Colt here in the A tier. Being an attacker, 200 damage, 750 health. It does a ton of damage, especially with Bulletstorm. One of the most amount of damage inside of the game is Colt, and this is something that you're going to want to prioritize. Colt does so much damage and can really pack a punch, especially in the late game with his Bulletstorm, and that is why he's going to be in the A tier. Next up in the A tier, we have the Medic. Being a healer, doing 125 damage and 900 HP, the Medic really does a great job at just keeping your units alive. The number one thing you want, especially in the late game, is healing, and that is where the Medic strides. It is going to be absolutely amazing to have the Medic, especially in the late game skirmishes, to heal up your army before you got to go back into battle again. A tier is going to be the Chicken. 120 damage, 1000 HP, one of the weaker units inside of the game, but the boots is where the Chicken is going to be great. The more turbo you have, the more you can move around, the faster you can attack. This is a super important unit inside of squad busters. If you didn't know, the turbo boot, also if you're standing still and you're holding down the turbo boot, you attack faster. The Chicken is very, very good, especially when you don't get a lot of blue boxes, which is going to turn into the meta where people are going to go after the blue boxes because they have a boot in every single one of them, you might need a chicken just to be able to move around in the late game and avoid getting absolutely clobbered by a big mega unit. Next up, we have the Hog Rider. 150 damage, 1500 HP. It's a pretty good mini tank, but it moves a lot faster around, and your turbo is going to recharge a lot faster with the Hog Rider, which means you're going to be able to turbo more, and you're going to be able to move around the map a lot faster and attack faster as well. The Hog Rider is very, very strong to have inside of your squad, especially in the late game, as it's one of the best units inside of Squad Busters, especially in the end game. Next up, we have Mortis. Being an all-rounder, 175 damage, 1700 HP. It's not really great until it gets its super unlocked, where it is its third form. Once it does get its third form, it's going to be able to survive, or should I say revive, 4 units that you bust. Hopefully you bust some big guys. You're going to have them with your squad, and then once they get eliminated, they are also going to turn into bats. Mortis is one of those champions that is going to flood the enemy, and that's going to really allow you to win in these late game battles. The more you have in the front lines to protect your carries, the more damage you're going to do, and the better off you are. Next up, in the A tier, we have Bo. Bo, being an attacker, doing 125 damage and 700 HP, one of the lowest HPs inside of the game, but the reason why you get Bo is to destroy monsters in the early game, to get you faster blue boxes, to get you faster coins, gems, speed ups, and then really build your army as fast as possible. I wouldn't really recommend having more than one Bo in your army at any given time unless you have to fuse it if you are playing versus, let's just say, tree giants or whack-a-mole, or, you know, chest imposters, or even the loot goblins. Anything that has monsters, you're going to want to fuse that bow and leave it just as a fused bow, and that's all you're going to want. Anywhere else, I would just recommend getting one bow early. If not, I would just opt to go for Colt and then not use Bo. But Bo in a lot of game modes is really strong, and that's why he's in the A tier. Next up, rounding out the A tier, is going to be the Witch. Being an attacker, 230 damage, 1000 HP. The spawn of the skeletons is absolutely insane. Cannot stress this enough, especially having a skeleton barrel spell in the late game. You just have so many skeletons that are swarming your opponent that it really gives you a very strong advantage. You definitely want the Witch in your army at some point in the match, because the skeletons are definitely going to soak a lot of hits, allowing you to win the endgame fights. Next up, we have the S tier. The first character in the S tier is the Barbarian King. And the reason why the Barbarian King here is because he has the most HP pretty much in the game. 145 damage, 3200 HP. It can pummel enemies down, it will heal itself when it's not attacking, and it gives a boost to all of your melee units. It's pretty much every single thing you want inside of a character. Barbarian King is an absolute beast inside of Squad Busters, and I highly recommend you use him. The only time I would not use him is if I have a lot more ranged characters, and it's a choice between Barbarian King and Archer Queen. Next up, we have the Archer Queen, coming in at 140 damage, 1200 HP, does a ton of damage, makes our ranged units attack a lot faster. It'll occasionally fire exploding arrows, and it will recover health when not moving. So this is pretty much everything you want inside of a character here. It's going to do a ton of damage, boost the damage of your Colts, your Dynamites, your Wizards, everything in the backline, your Witches, everything. That is what you're going to want to deal damage with, and that is why the Archer Queen is all the way up in the S tier. She is absolutely amazing. Coming in as the second best squad character inside of the game is Max. Speed is the name of the game here. Max being able to zoom around, especially in the late game. When you get a Max, your entire army goes at the speed of light. You're able to actually be able to reposition when you're fighting to go behind the enemy really, really fast to clear out their ranged units and then reposition again. Max allows you to you easily reposition your army inside of Squad Busters for the late game fights, and that is why Max is the second best character inside of Squad Busters. And the best character inside of Squad Busters is B. 200 damage, 900 HP, but that's not where B strides. When the bees are summoned around B, it's absolute chaos for anybody who wants to come in your range. The more units they have, the more units you can hit with the bees, the more damage you are going to do. B is a late game character monster in the end of the matches that can single-handedly carry you the match, especially if you have a fused up bee and maybe even another one. You have a lot of bees flying around you. You'll be able to do a ton of damage in the end game and really be able to control the middle of the map.